And welcome back. Well, now that we're back in 3ds Max, what we need to do is pop up to our Layers Manager, and you'll notice that default is ticked as the active layer. So what we want to do is pop down to Propeller and make sure that that one's ticked. We can also open up this layer, and what we want to do is hide the prop blades, the prop housing and the nose cone static, and unhide the nose cone spin. That's the one that we created earlier. And now we can close this down. Next we're going to pop in to our back view. Well, it's the back view for me, so let's pop into that and zoom back a little bit. Now up to my create panel, we're on geometry, we've got standard primitives, and I want a plane. Okay, so let's just drag this out to begin with, and the parameters, I'm going to set this to 80 by 80. Segments I want as 1, width segments 1 also. And now I'm going to right click on this and convert it to an editable poly. Now pressing Alt A, what I'm going to do is line it up to the nose cone spinning. There we go. That's fine, and say OK. Now this is probably a little bit too far forward, so pop into the left viewport, L on the keyboard. Let me just come across. There we can see it. I want to bring that back just a little bit, somewhere like that. And now popping into our perspective viewport, that's P. Pause on the keyboard, and let's just have a zoom around there. And now we can pop into our material editor, and what I want is a blank swatch. I'm going to go with this one, and we're going to forget this part here. We're going straight down to maps, and in the diffuse color I'm clicking on this blank button here. Let's just close this one down. I want standard bitmap, double click into scenes, that's the prop spin 01 specular, so I want prop spin 01 there. Okay, so this is related to that image there. We need to come up one layer, but before we go any further, let's now apply this material to our object. So there we go, applied. Now if we move this over here for a moment and just zoom back, we can see that, well, we can't really see through it. Everything's black and it's just an image. So how can we get this to be translucent? Well, what we need to do is actually grab the prop spin button there, left click, keep it held down, and drag it down to opacity. Let go. I'm going to say copy and say OK, and there we are. What it's effectively doing is actually making the black sections translucent. Now if we pop up to our render and do a quick render, there we go. Now we can begin to see through to the fuselage behind. So what factors are at play here? Well, let's just close this down for a moment. Now the opacity here is working on our prop spin 01 JPEG image, not so much the image itself, but on the alpha sections of it, those parts which are black and those parts which are white. We've got this to 100%, and that means anything which is black is going to be completely transparent. anything which is white will be opaque, and that's why we see this here. The white is opaque. From the black and up through the different shades of grey are now transparent. So that tells us that we really have a bit of a problem with our image. If we want things to be transparent, then we should avoid having white. In fact, if we look at this, it's rather cartoonish. Let's just do another render. There you go, you see? It looks unreal. Okay, so let's take a moment to have a look at a proper Messerschmitt in flight. Now here we can see that prop spin. It's quite subtle. I know you can't hear the roar of the engines here. Okay, let's stop that. As we can see, the prop spin on that was quite subtle, totally opposed to what we have here. Let me just close this down. Now we can play around with this to some extent, but we have limited ourselves as far as creating a pure white is concerned. Let me just show you what I mean. If we reduce the amount here in the opacity, there we go, all it's doing is increasing the level which becomes less transparent. If we do a quick render of that, there you can see we now have this graying around here. We don't want that. Let's close that down. So if we increase that back up to 100%, could we reduce this amount? Well, let's try reducing that. See what the effect is. Well, that's certainly a little bit better. But we have areas around here which, again, don't look all that good, and if we had a background image in, we would see that. So by having a pure white in our original image has actually limited our abilities to get this looking realistic. So the type of image that you really need to create is something that looks like this. Now this is one that I spent, I would say, about an hour working on, and as you can see it looks very similar to that of a CD, and of course the specular map, well, that's going to look like a vinyl record, an old one. But those are the type of images that we should be creating. You'll see that there is no white. Okay, so let's load up these images that I've created and see what we can do with them. So just close this down, close that down. I'm going to pop into the diffuse section here. We'll push that back up to 100% to start with. Left click on this button here, and it brings me into this section, and I want to have a look at that. There it is, prop spin diffuse. Let's come back up one level, and what I'm going to do now is left click on that one, drag that down to there, do a copy and say OK. Now we can see that everything has disappeared, so let's now do a render. Well, that is certainly looking a lot better, and of course we can play around with this in this section. Let's just reduce that somewhat, do another render, and there we go. Let me just come in here for a moment, close that, up to layer manager. You'll notice that I have a new layer here, and it's called scene set, and that will be for the next section of these tutorials when it comes to setting up the scenes and looking at animation. Okay, so let's just unhide that for a moment. There we go. Now let's do a render. And there we are. Okay, well, again, it still requires a little bit more work doing with it, but you can see where we're going with this. It comes down to your observational skills and being able to recreate what it is that you're really seeing and not what you think you're seeing. Well, let's pop in and add the specular level now. So into Material Editor again, specular level, bitmap, and let's add that one. And now a render. Well, it's getting there. Let's pop over here, pop up one level. Let's try this again, put that up to 100. Okay, so we can definitely see how we can begin to manipulate this a little bit more and start refining it. Okay, well, now what I want to do is actually link it up to our point connection within the rig section. So let's close this down, close this down, into layers, unhide rig, close that down now. Let me just pull around a little bit more, go into link, I want plane 2, select that, drag it down to this point here, and it's linked. So now when it comes to the animation side, that prop blur image is now linked to our prop spin control. Okay, well, that just about wraps it up, not only for this session but for this section on applying materials and UVW maps. But having said that, I think I will be popping back at some point to actually work on the cockpit area and also create a pilot for our Messerschmitt. That could be quite interesting. Okay, well, in the next series of short tutorials we'll be looking at how we can start to set the scene for our model and in preparation for animation. I'll catch you later.